As a neuroscientist most of my career, I believe the major limitation is the fact that we really truly have a materialist worldview in science. And I would say that the vast majority of my colleagues have that view, and that keeps us from being aware that there's the possibility of an alternative theory, which might be that consciousness is fundamental. And until we become a little bit more curious about looking at alternative theories, I think we will be at an impasse as scientists. So the major thing is to open up our curiosity to looking at alternative theories of reality. I think that we need to, again, explore these alternative points of views. And one of the ways that I look at this myself is that the brain is clearly a filter to a higher consciousness. And I think even materialist neuroscientists understand that filtering point of view. And we know that, in fact, our nervous system has to filter out most of the information that's coming in through our five senses, or we couldn't function in this physical world. But I say that in addition to that, our other networks in our brain, like for example, the default mode network, are also filtering out a higher consciousness. And when we actually quiet the brain activity, we can then open up ourselves as the filters are reduced and we can see a wider awareness. I absolutely think it needs to be taken into education in the universities, and I would say that this would be one way of actually helping to move science forward, and that is to start training people at a young level, including children in elementary school, and training them to be more curious, training them to quiet their minds down so they can open up to a broader awareness, and then also begin to give funding to young scientists and graduate students related to studies on consciousness that could really be testing the theory that consciousness is fundamental.
How are you going to deal with the asymmetry of funding between materialistic science and non-materialistic science?
That's a very interesting question about funding, and I think that that's been one of the major limitations to actually getting more research done in the area of testing whether consciousness might be fundamental. And I think the way we've solved it so far is through private funding. And those philanthropic organizations are very helpful on the one hand, but I wish that we could convince in the United States our National Institutes of Health and in other countries those same national organizations for funding to give a certain portion of their funding to projects of this sort that allow scientists to actually ask questions that are outside of the main materialist worldview.
What implications do you think an extended post-materialistic science of consciousness would have for science and for society in general?
I think that's absolutely a critical question, and I think that what it would do is allow us to see the world in a whole different perspective, and what I would call a perspective of interconnectedness amongst all things, all peoples, and all parts of the planet. And if we did that, we would treat the planet in a very respectful way, what I might call actually a sacred way, understanding the value of all other beings on the planet, and stop trying to take advantage materially of things for our own individual perspective. I think it would also allow a lot more congeniality amongst peoples in the planet and respect amongst people on the planet.
What new frontiers of knowing and research would you propose?
That's a very interesting question, and I think what I would propose is, first of all, more research on end-of-life experiences. And that includes both terminal lucidity, people actually coming back to communication when we know that they have brain dysfunction like Alzheimer's disease. And that's because right now there are very few studies that are out there because government funding has not been available for those studies. So once again, I encourage governments to spend more money and more attention on studies related to end of life. The second one would be near-death experiences, because if one can really give more data showing that people with a cardiac arrest and a flat EEG are aware of things going on in an operating room or in a recovery room in a hospital from perhaps a point of view above their body, that to me is absolutely incontrovertible evidence that consciousness can exist outside of the activity of neurons in the brain. I think the thing that we need to do is to focus on graduate students in universities and on young scientists. And I think if, again, we would find ways of funding those graduate students and the young scientists to do research in this area, that would move science forward much, much faster than it's moving now.
You are a teacher and you teach young students. Do you think they are more open to these sorts of things than you were?
I think that young students are absolutely more open than I was, and I think that is really a hope for the future, that they really have a curious attitude about these things and are willing, in fact, to look into these and to do research in these new areas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.